Hello everyone, I'm Aino Corry and I'm interviewing some of the speakers for the YOW Online 2020. And one of the speakers that we're happy to have this year is Joe Macleod. We hope to bring him to Australia, but now we're going to bring him virtually. And Joe, I'm wondering about your name because I'm a huge fan of Highlander, of course, and especially Connor
really?
McLeod. So I'm wondering, are you related in any way?
No, but I can divulge a lot of stuff now. So the Highlander film, I think, is super funny because it was so 80s, wasn't it? Everyone, it was actually really bad and really overacted script. So the name MacLeod means son of, Mac means son of, and Leod was the king. And so you're son of Leod, that's MacLeod. A weird turn up for my books recently has been somebody was saying that the link between Donald Trump and Scotland is through his grandmother, and his grandmother was a MacLeod in her heritage. So I've got a heritage line towards yeah, that guy.
Well, congratulations,
so that's interesting.
Joe. Yeah.
Sorry.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thanks for that. I'm proud, as you can imagine.
Yes.
So yeah, I mean, it's a great name, but a lot of people pronounce it wrongly, or there's variants of it and spell it wrongly, as everyone has their name spelled wrongly. But it's quite common, and you see that like a version of it through a lot of Scandic areas, like Richardson or like son of is quite a common Scandinavian thing.
Yeah, that's true. So how do you actually pronounce it?
MacLeod is fine.
Okay.
Macleod, I've heard a lot as well, which is, I guess accurately it should be called Macleod, but MacLeod is fine.
Yeah, okay, great. So I did pronounce it correctly.
Cool.
So what we're going to talk about today, Joe, is ending. So before we end this interview, I want you to talk about the weird thing that you find on the internet. If you search for your name, you find out that you started the world's first customer ending business. And that sounds a bit counterintuitive. Why would you want your customer relation to end?
Absolutely. And I've been, before starting the business, andEnd it's called, I started looking into endings way back, nearly 20 years ago actually, and was sort of fascinated by it and started to build up sort of an interest in endings. And then started to really dig into it about 4 or 5 years ago, and then I thought, it's so interesting and so important. I ended up writing a book about it and trying to understand consumerism from the point of endings. And it goes way back in history, Protestant uprising, the relationship we have with religion. And I found it so interesting. I started, the book came out about 2 or 3 years ago. And I more recently, I was doing lots of workshops around how to build endings and design them. I'm writing a second book now, which is about how to do it. And now I thought, like, I should build a business around it. I think it's an important thing, and it's there's a real need as businesses to think about endings and how important they are. I've just started posting 6 reasons to end your business, so you can go to the website later and have a look at that.
Yeah, I noticed those reasons, and one of the reasons was that it's better for sustainability and the environment. Could you elaborate a bit on that? How can endings be good for environment?
So one of the big problems with the sustainability movement, in my mind, is that we have tried to package sustainability in the way of better purchases. So we see this in relationship to, I'm going to build a better chair, which is lower impact on the environment. But to justify that chair, you have to make a sale of the chair. And if you're selling anything, especially if it has to change a lot of the details and manufacturing things, there's going to increase a price difference. And really, the price is such an important aspect of if you're selling chairs mass market. go up against IKEA with a perfectly circular economy chair, and you're potentially going to lose just on price. But the important thing is, and I talk about this a lot, and this is the key point, is it's the experience of the end. And the experience of sustainability is more purchasing on many occasions. We don't talk about the offboarding and how vital it is to make that better. So as I point out on many of my talks, the reason plastic is in the sea is not because it is a petroleum material. The reason plastic is in the sea is because the end didn't capture that plastic before it got there. And it's important to think about, how do we capture these things before they fall into the wrong places? And that's very much around the essence of what I'm trying to do with sustainability and endings.
Yeah. So that's the thing about thinking when you purchase something or when you get something, how do I actually get rid of it again? So if you look at chemicals, if you buy chemicals, it says in big letters how you get rid of the can, how you get rid of residue chemicals. But of course, you don't really want to get rid of customers, right? Or do you want to get rid of customers?
Well, actually, I'll come back on the chemical thing. If you do buy a can of something which is dangerous, there is usually a warning symbol on it. But these, on many occasions, have been tested, like, do people understand what a warning symbol means? And many occasions they don't. If you look at recycling symbols, there's so many recycling looking symbols, and a lot of those are put on products that aren't actually recyclable. So if the green dot, for example, which is two arrows going around each other in a green dot, that's got nothing to do with it, that product being recyclable. It's got everything to do with that company provides funds to a recycling system. So even as a consumer experience, we're being told a very crude and mixed up message at the offboarding of the consumer life cycle. And a symbol isn't an experience. So we need to change that as well. So it's about creating experiences which are good at offboarding. I can give you an example with the pant scheme, which you see in a lot of countries around Europe, which is, I think Germany has it, Sweden has it. But the principle is when you buy a plastic bottle of water, for example, and it has pant on it, there's a small donation of money gets taken off. You put a small donation of money on when you purchase it. And then you do the normal life cycle of using a bottle of water, for example, and then you take that very bottle back and put it in a machine and it gets crushed appropriately, and then you get the money back. And this is helps the consumer experience be engaged from the beginning, because I've got some money hanging around at the shop until I take that bottle back at the end. So you're closing down the thing. It means the materials are accurately recycled. It means that the consumer is engaged and aware, and importantly, in my mind around endings, is the consumer's making an action at the end. It's not a passive experience. Mm-hmm. So that's a really good example of an end.
Yeah. And what about customer endings? You use Netflix as an example on your website, who are thinking about the customer endings in a good way.
Yeah, so Netflix is a good example. What we've seen, whenever I talk to a business, they say to me, like, why on earth do I want to think about endings when I lose customers? I make a metaphor of the famous death, the same famous philosopher talking about Epicurus, talking about death, says, when death comes, I will be dead, or if death is, then I am not. And if I am, then death is not. Why should I fear something which I won't be here to experience? And this is our approach to a lot of consumer experiences. So when my customer's leaving, why should I care? And when they're chucking things in the bin, why should I care? Because that I've got the money already. So we're up against trying to get people engaged to the consumer life cycle. With Netflix, we've got a lot of businesses hate the idea of a customer leaving, so they lock them in with aggressive contracts. And this has been a tradition, like the gym industry is a really good example of that. you can't get out of a gym membership, for example. But Netflix took a decision to sort of embrace endings and allow people to come and go. And this is a massive leap forward, really, in terms of a sort of philosophical model for businesses. So Netflix is up against, for example, cable TV in the US. And cable TV in the US, the consumer satisfaction rate for that, for example, has been going down for 11 years. And their consumer satisfaction is like 65%. Netflix is at like 85, 87%, going up all the time. And they're into nearly 200 million customers now. The consumer experience of watching TV is pretty similar. You sit in front of a great big monitor and watch TV. So trapping people in doesn't necessarily work, even for your consumer experience.
Yeah, that is interesting. So it's good for the consumer, the whole consumer experience, to think the product ending into the product and the customer road entering into the product as well. So that makes me think of another thing. So this thing about not thinking about endings, it's important in all aspects of life, I guess. Would you say that when people go into a marriage, enter a marriage with somebody else, should they think about the ending of that marriage as well?
Absolutely. And I think we've been very burdened with many centuries of perception of what marriage is and how it should end. There's been incredible amounts of pressure to not, oh, here comes some tea. Thank you.
You're lucky.
Sorry about that.
Don't think about ending that marriage for sure.
Yes, no. Yeah, exactly. No, this marriage is fairly intact at the moment. And especially with cups of tea coming. So,
yeah.
So there's enormous amount of pressure from the past of not ending marriages, and as we move into more modern eras and more, I think, sensible, balanced societies, we start to have marriage come up as people wanting to leave. There's big problems with how that ends. There's a thing in there's two types of divorce, for example, you can have. In fact, there's only two ways out of a marriage. That's death and divorce. It's hard to go out any other way with a marriage. But there's two types of divorce you can have. There's a no-fault divorce, which means there's either party, both of them just wanted to leave one another, and it's no one's particular fault. That seems a mature and sensible approach to marriage, ending marriages. And also it allows for amicability. It means that there's still potential for that couple to be amicable, and that's really important if you've got kids, that you've still got a level of trust and ability to work with one another. And in some countries you have a thing called no fault divorce, which means somebody's to blame. Now, if someone's to blame but yet both parties want a divorce, then somebody's going to have to take the fall and say they've been having an affair, or say they've been doing this. And in the UK, for example, there's 5 reasons you can have a fault divorce, and there's things like they've been unfaithful, or they're violent, or etc., etc. An interesting thing, there's a woman in the UK for the last few years, actually, I think last 4 years, has been trying to leave her husband amicably without anyone saying there's a fault. But the law didn't allow it, and so this came to court like a few years ago, and then the judge said that he had no ability in the UK law to allow this woman to leave her husband. Yet she wanted to leave and she hated the relationship, but he couldn't allow her to leave without her admitting fault, and neither party went. So they carried on their sort of sham marriage, as it were. And but the judge also recommended that the law be updated. So I think there's a lot of going on in the UK now to have no-fault divorces. There's a significant difference in terms of fault and no-fault divorces in the US, for example, where different states right next to one another will have fault and no-fault divorces. Wives committing suicide in the states that have fault divorces is, I think, 13 to 25% higher, and domestic abuse is significantly higher, like 40 to 50% higher. So it is a terrible method of ending.
Yeah,
a marriage.
That's interesting. I didn't know that. And if we take that back to products again, you can talk about,
yes,
and you end the relationship with the customer without a fault. Can the customer just end it without claiming something is against the agreement or something like that?
Absolutely. So in the work I do in the next book, I talk about there's 8 different methods of ending things. There's sort of things like a timeout ending, where there's an agreement, the thing will end. For example, holidays that end after 2 weeks, or educational courses, like a degree ends after 3 years, for example. And then breakages and different things. We talk about competition being the most important ending, because as a business, you're getting out competed and stuff, and we talk about that all the time, and we overlook all of the other different types of endings. So there's, out of these 8 endings, there's different characteristics that come about because you've got that type of ending, and it's important to sort of acknowledge these and work with them. Because if an ending happens out of sort of surprise, and as you point out, there's a fault in the ending, it's usually out of surprise and bad preparation. You can acknowledge and prepare for and design around all types of these 8 endings, and most of the time we only develop around competition. So, for example, if you have actually a good one is, for example, when somebody leaves a country, they move out of the proximity of a supplier. So when I moved to Sweden, I moved out of the proximity of the BBC. And so the BBC couldn't do anything about that, and nor could I, and it was a natural ending. So how do you, if you don't acknowledge different endings, you can't plan for them, and then you fall into this trap that loads of businesses are in, that they just that allow the person to leave without anything, or saying a goodbye, or acknowledging it, or designing around it. So you have these very barren, emotionless endings that are unforgivable from the consumer experience perspective.
You're slamming the door in a sense.
Exactly, and it's such little care and thought around it, that why would anyone come back to you? Because there's very few customers now that are sort of new to a market, as it were. We've all experienced multiple operators in a particular market. So we jump from, say, Netflix to HBO to any other operator. So we're all doing that all the time. So the idea that somebody's going to leave and you'll never see them again, and you shouldn't care about it because you're going to go on to the next acquisition target, is very dated. So we need to start thinking of sort of the coming and going of people, and creating good endings that mean something to the consumer, and they're emotional, engaging, and actionable.
Yeah. So in a sense that makes me really want to write up what I want when I die, what should happen to me. I know I already donated my organs to science and whoever needs them and things like that, but there's something about that, the ending of a life, and there's something about religion and the ending of a life. I know that you looked into that to find out what is causing this, either that we can talk about endings or not. Could you elaborate on that?
Certainly. I think when we talk about, actually a good example, I think, is sustainability, and we've overburdened the environment, creating too many things, making too many things. And it's a good example of not thinking about the end in a wider sense. Our consumption of raw materials is going out, way out of the ability for Earth to fulfill it. And when I started looking into the ends, I done a small project years ago, and I dug in quite shallowly into that. And I see a lot of the way we approach the problems with consumerism, they're like, oh, if we went back 10 years, we can make improvements or do this type of thing. And actually it goes way, way, way back, way, way, way deeper when you start to think about irresponsibility and lack of endings. So when I started looking into the second book, I started with death, and actually, because the Industrial Revolution, and therefore after it the consumer boom of marketing, advertising to fulfill all the factories, it started in Europe, really. So you look at Europe around death, pre-industrial revolution, you really end up at the plague, the Protestant uprising. And when previous to the plague, we had quite a simple logic around life, which was you sort of live life, you look towards religion to guide you, and you look towards heaven as an ending to life, and you'll be honoured in heaven because of your good life that you've led. That all went out the window when the plague came along. Just incredible quantities of people died. I mean, the pandemic's absolutely zilch on top of the amount of people died in the plague. I read Daniel Defoe's rendition book about the London plague. It's called A Year in the Plague, and it was written soon after the first batches of it. But my God, it's baffling. Very strangely similar to the pandemic now, how we approached it. So nothing changes there. However, but that type of amount of death really upturned the whole logic of like, I live good life and I die and then I get to heaven. So loads of questions started to get answered. The Protestants had different approaches to it, and they also introduced different, 3 different things which characterized how we sort of frame a lot of our life, and also particularly how the Industrial Revolution started to move forward. So in the Protestant world, you could have a good job and be proud of that job. In the Catholic world, the one which was the sort of alternative at the time, in the Catholic world, you could only have 3 good jobs, and that was a pope, a priest, and a nun, all religious. But Protestants could do anything, and that was whether you be a carpenter, an interaction designer, a developer, a full stack developer. All of these things you can do in the eyes of God in the Protestant religion. The other thing was our relationship with investment. Now, this is really interesting, and we don't think about it much now, but the Protestants allowed us as individuals to invest in ourselves. And when we buy stuff, the amount of times you say to yourself, that'll be good for this, because I'm investing in myself. And there's a sort of subtext of investing in yourself, which previously it would be seen to be very frivolous and irresponsible to spend money on yourself with such ease. And the other thing was fasting. There was, in many religions, you have the skill of removing yourself from the abundance of life and reflecting upon it. So in Martin Luther removed organized fasting really early on in the Protestant religious calendar. And I think that's very key to us not being able to reflect on the consumption we do now. It's an incredible skill, fasting and reflecting on what you have. And we have lost that totally in consumerism. So you roll forward to the Industrial Revolution, and you have these foundations which have changed religiously around endings. And of course, the last one I forgot to mention is the Catholic relationship with death and the end of life. And the Protestant one is that in the Catholic one, you can renounce your sins throughout life. So it's a constant sort of turning wheel of negotiation, and you're always thinking about the end and what's next. With the Protestant model, you have none of that. You only get judged once at the gates. And so a lot of the Protestant mindset turns into like, well, why should I worry about it so much? Because I'm not thinking about, I'm not reflecting upon the end. So we've actually taken centuries to hone this skill of not giving a fuck about endings. It's not something that industrialists made. It's not something that me as a consumer or so-and-so's done. It's bedded in 400 years ago. So it's a very different approach. So when you get into the Industrial Revolution and we start buying stuff, all of this really supports that churning, buying. And then you get to things like there's another thing which I think is really interesting is the progressive obsolescence, which means, have you ever heard of that?
No, I haven't.
Progressive obsolescence. So this is the American take on what was industrialism, but also like bourgeoisie, I guess, was happening in Europe, which was a presentation of a highfalutin life and wearing special things. But even in that group of people, they would, although wear something very nice, they might wear that again and again until it potentially wore out. But in America, there was, and this is sort of in the 30s to 50s, the sort of consumer boom there. There's this woman, and I forget her name for a moment, but she talked about this thing of progressive obsolescence. I think it's progressive obsolescence, where am I getting that right? Anyway, this concept in America of being able to just buy stuff because you like buying stuff. And that was a world apart from buying stuff because it looks nice. It changes the pace, it changes the model, and we go a step faster towards consumption. And what's happening over all of this period, if you think previous to Industrial Revolution, this is the onboarding and offboarding are balanced, then you're getting to a point where onboarding is just, there's such a lot more gravity around that as an experience. You've got things like department stores emerging, marketing getting mature. So
I mean, you can see also, the unpackaging things on YouTube, people really like that part. You never see people throw things away, right?
No, it's not. There's no massive people wanting to go, check out how I throw this away. Although that's a great idea. I should do a festival of throwing things away and burning them.
I think that'd be a great channel.
That would be quite interesting, wouldn't it? We should work on that, I know. But so it's really important to frame endings as a bigger thing. Otherwise, we fall into this trap of endings being about you're bad because you're a consumer, and you should stop being a consumer. There's way more complexities in it in terms of a social experience, human experience, and stacks in our history that go around it.
Yeah. And with that, ironically, we need to end the interview, Joe. So thank you very much. I think we got around products and marriages and Protestants and Catholics, and I think it was very interesting. But if you really want to hear an interesting and educational and actually also funny presentation, you should watch Joe Macleod when YOW Online comes to your computer, to a computer near you. And thank you for your time, Joe.
You're welcome, and thanks for getting in touch and offering me this interview. It's brilliant.
Hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.
See you soon. Bye. Bye.